So now we're going to have a panel. I want Mark and Sue and Ben to come up here, and we're going to talk about, what we've seen in the last 10 years and whatnot, about place-based initiatives and this federal intervention model. I'm going to have, come on up. Let's take a seat. Well, Mark, you're going to be up first, and then we'll have Sue. Good to see you, buddy. And each one will just yeah, go ahead and take that one there. And yeah, I got to be on the mic. You got to be on the mic so the folks can see it. Sorry. So yeah, it's I'm delighted to be on this journey with these three panelists who have really done so much important work about strengthening manufacturing, place-based initiatives, and bringing a science to this. Anyway, you know them. I think most people know them. Let me just introduce Mark Murrow from Brookings.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Good. Can you hear me?
Be on top of it.
Right on top of it. Okay, well, great. Well, it's good to see everybody. It's a incredible moment. It's always a moment of change in this field, and we're facing another one. I find myself not entirely concerned about that. In some ways, I think there's a lot to be gained here. But what I thought I'd briefly do is talk a bit about just reviewing how central manufacturing has been and manufacturing issues have been to a broader emergence of place-based thinking in this town. I mean, sure, a lot of the place-based work is about manufacturing specifically, but it's also become a broader way to think about problem solving. And I think you all have a lot to do with that. So I just want to say a few things about that. And then I want to just, maybe we could pause or go right into, sort of crucial next priorities as we're at this juncture that I think, I think there are a lot of things to think about here. But I just think I just want to say, I think you all and we all should be excited that manufacturing issues have been central all this time and are now really more central than ever and have yielded insights about how to solve problems in general, whether it's for direct manufacturing related issues, but for completely unrelated topics. There's a broad recognition that these insights really emerge from particular insights about manufacturing in advanced industries, especially since the 2000 China shock. Dramatically, the China shock with its massive spike of low-cost import substitution epitomized several decades of production sector disruption and it upending labor markets and severely weakening hundreds of manufacturing communities. In that sense, and in that sense, it played out as a central motivation for the recent embrace of place-based development strategy. Broader underperformance also played a role in motivating the belated development of solid place-based industrial strategy in the U.S. It's where work by Sue Helper, Howard Weil, Jonathan Gruber, and Simon Johnson, Rob Atkinson, and myself dramatized the need for action. So this sector epitomized and motivated broader reaction. Speaking for my own work with Rob Atkinson, we grew really shocked by the very slow recovery most places were seeing from the financial crisis. We kept measuring metro by metro growth of the innovation sector and advanced industry segments and kept seeing the same thing. Strong growth on the one hand of employment and output in a few coastal superstar cities, and on the other hand, drift basically everywhere else. And we were really struck by that divide. And I think that also helped galvanize. You all, this community knew about that well, but it took time for the country and policymakers to really understand that. Places weren't converging and catching up with each other helpfully. They were actually diverging and in often cases slipping back. So that we felt there was no way to run a railroad. The manufacturing communities knew that, and I think have been a crucial source of understanding of that and validation of that when policymakers began to think about actions. And all of us, I think, agreed in this community early. This is not a minor problem. You thought this was a big problem, and I think one that rose to national levels. Um, in, hence, we arrived at the 117th Congress, prompted by the Biden administration, yes, but also by, at least early on, by a very strong group of smaller state Republican senators that believed in this issue, were concerned about it. This represented a major commitment to really take action. And so we saw the Chips and Science Act, for instance, which I think gets to two critical dimensions of thinking about policy. One is the macro one. Major macroeconomic investments were needed to drive substantial growth. So sector-related R&D was critical. The research part was critical, but so was the place-based piece. And I think many of us felt a lot of things that have been circulating and talked about by people in this room, people like Stephen Ezell, came into focus and suddenly became much more nationally accepted. The place-based part is essential because it offers, I think, a more pointed and efficient way of tackling broad challenges. You have to have those background macro approaches, but you have to have direct, tighter focused interventions. I think it's simply a better mousetrap for getting at micro underpinnings of bigger macro problems. You have to have both. And I think there is a growing recognition about that. And why is this? These kind of place-based industrial strategies target specific location and detail of a market problem. They get at what Gary Pisano and Willie Shih have memorably called a manufacturing or industrial commons, right? The place-based concentrations that you were just talking about of research institutions, skilled workers and suppliers of workers, suppliers in general, and all kinds of other institutions. And then place-oriented policies, this is the softer one, I think are more likely to get the civics right? Especially when they enlist and catalyze local bottom-up problem solving. There is a better sense of getting buy-in, I think, in building alliances around this agenda. So for those reasons, I think place-based is a better mousetrap. And in fact, I think the learnings about that have come very much out of this field and have become a nationally significant. Hence the power of the Biden administration's experiments here. The litany. We count $80 billion of place-based industrial strategy specifically. That's explicit. There's much more that is place-based implicitly, but we're talking about a significant effort. We just research from Brookings, we just showed $40 billion allocated for 13 programs so far. And best of all, a clear theory being promulgated through the country. I think the nation really has made a breakthrough here. I don't think the genie's going back in the bottle, but let's just spend a minute on where we're heading, and I'll be quiet. What now? I mean, there's plenty to worry about, certainly, about as we think about what's next for the nation's experiment with place-based industrial strategy. I do call it an experiment. It probably needs to be much larger, if anything, going forward. And it's a fledgling experiment, so there's vulnerability whenever something is new. And then talk in DC is swinging to austerity, and Elon Musk is talking about slashing $2 trillion from the budget. Can't really be helpful. But that said, I don't foresee wholesale warring on either the programs that you have been using in some cases, and your activities. What does loom, I think, has been the question of what we call sustainability. And this is less environmental sustainability, which we think is inherent to the place-based insight. I'm talking about sustainability of initiatives. How do you keep the lights on for not 1 year, 2 year, but the 10 to 20 years it will take to meaningfully adjust the trajectory to of regions? Are we going back to self-help entirely? Maybe spiritually we need to return to some of that. Part of this, though, is fighting like hell to maintain, fully fund, and even extend federal programs when there are opportunities. We should support the National Defense Authorization Act, including up to $500 million from spectrum sales to support the tech hubs. Yeah, with that said, tough-minded problem solving to sustain initiatives, what you have been doing in the past, you're going to need to continue. It won't get easier, not just for completing immediate projects, but delivering true transformation. Regional leaders have got to work on how to ensure their initiatives survive robustly enough and long enough to create real change. The programs that we're talking about never have been meant to be an open-ended, funding of your immediate operations. They are catalytic, but that means there's on you that work of turning catalytic one-time or near-term investments into longer-term transformation. And that's going to mean getting very conversant with what our colleague David Johnson in Indiana calls the sustainability capital stack. These are the funding tools that you can turn to that you're familiar with, but now have to do it with a new urgency. State and public investments have to become much bigger part of this. Philanthropic support, university support, commercial sources. These are the options you have. I think you all know that. You've made do with them for a long time before the 117th Congress, and you were always going to have to return to them. I think, though, your aspirations have been raised, and the support that you will encounter nationally is much broader, however. So to wrap up, I would just say, those are the tools available for making this time different. We want to make sure that we're not going back to the 2000s or the 1990s. We have to find ways to jury-rig this infusion that we have seen into a more sustainable way of building manufacturing communities. So that's what I've been thinking about. Really interested to hear how you are thinking about it in your communities. But how do we get to the true transformation of scores of places? So thank you. Very interested to hear the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. That's great. And we're on this journey. Yeah, the lingo we use sometimes is sustainment, just to distinguish it from sustain. But it's something that the regional panel will probably be talking a lot about. Is these regional leaders have to pivot, right, from one thing to the next to have sustainment of these consortia initiatives within their region. So thank you very much for those comments. And Sue, you can use the dais here, the mic up there, or stay where you are, whichever you're more comfortable with. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's cool.
Cool.
And so, yeah, so Sue Helper has been critical leader at Case Western University, but has had stints here in the federal government helping to design policy intervention. So Sue.
Great. I'm so happy to be here. And it's really great to see this group and kind of where it's come. And so what I guess Matt asked me to do, and I'm happy to do, is to kind of talk a little bit about how we got here, taking me a little trip along memory lane and kind of celebrate some successes and talk about where we are today, and then a little bit on future challenges. So it was about a decade ago that Matt and I was in the Obama administration. I was chief economist at Commerce, and Matt was at EPA. And there was this idea for the Investing in Communities Partnership, IMCP. I have the actual slides that I actually think is held up well. So thinking about the logic, and then this group that you all and under Matt's leadership have continued to meet and build. It's just so exciting. So this was the original view. We're going to create a race to the top in manufacturing economic development. We're going to build on a community's historic strengths to create a durable industrial ecosystem with integrated, then the big six things: integrated workforce, innovation, supply chains, capital access, infrastructure, and trade. Coordinate across the federal government to help communities build broad-based prosperity. And this is in opposition to poaching or smokestack chasing, which can lead to a race to the bottom and ability to provide services. So I feel like that actually has stood up pretty well, and that this kind of key idea that the regions are going to come together and create some stickiness that companies can get only if they're in the region, and so that creates some profits, some rents that can be shared for the community to grow and improve its prosperity. And so it's long been known that clusters can create economic development, that they're productive. This goes back to Alfred Marshall 150 years ago, talking about the English cotton textile industry. And research shows that clusters have greater employment, wages, patenting, and new industries. And they do this because they create spillover benefits. So when people come together, they create shared resources that no one actor can appropriate. And these resources are things like a shared supply chain, shared specialized equipment, shared workforces, and then something that Alfred Marshall called ideas in the air. So a conversation that you really have to be there. And even in this age of all kind of communication of many means, that the face-to-face still has a power. So this has long been known, but what was not known a decade ago, I think, was that you could create these clusters and strengthen them and build these spillover benefits, and how local, state, and national policy could come together to do that. And so a lot of you in this room, I think, are really responsible for a lot of the benefits that we've had. So we created some stuff in the IMCP. If anybody remembers the key technologies and supply chains and the location quotients that we forced you all to compute. But the goal was to make sure that we were not promoting poaching, that we were promoting building on existing and shared assets. So where are we today? I feel like we have an evidence base that we didn't have at that time. Some of that evidence goes back to very old programs, but we now have sort of rigorous econometric studies with, control groups and natural experiments. So people have shown things like, if you compare locations that got universities to otherwise similar locations or runner-up locations for universities, the ones that got the universities have higher wages, more innovation, all the good stuff. Similarly, I have some work just completed or just underway about national labs with similar findings, and that you can see some spillover benefits in patenting from national labs compared to counterfactual locations. You can see that wages of people who were in those counties when the national lab came in, those people benefited. You benefited especially if you had a college degree, but even those without college degrees benefited. So we could do this. One of the things, there's this kind of separate literature on the kinds of networks that do this. So the economists focus on things you could see. The treatment for an economist is you plump a university down. The treatment for a sociologist is you have certain people talk to each other. And so there's some work, there's a wonderfully titled book by Sean Stafford about why the Garden Club couldn't save Youngstown. There's some recent work by Ben Armstrong at MIT about comparing Cleveland and Pittsburgh. And the argument is about the nature of networks that need, who needs to talk to each other. One of the things I think we're finding over and over again is that, the money is great. It's not sufficient. You really need both. And so how do you have people talk to each other? And I think this work that I suggested, you need kind of you need coherent people who repeatedly talk to each other, but you also need weak ties, and you need to be replenishing and revitalizing that network. So it's not always the same people talking all the time. Let's see. So we have this evidentiary base. I think we're developing some best practices. So one of them is to really think about crowding in of private capital. How can public money crowd in private capital through, overcoming some externalities, or a lot of those are around climate, but also by identifying some particular bottlenecks and focusing money there. So an example in the electric vehicle industry is EV charging. And so there's research that shows that you spend money on chargers that has at least twice as much impact as giving people money to buy an electric vehicle. The upshot of all this and thinking about this is that under the Biden administration, clean energy policy is an estimate for every public dollar invested, $6 of private money has been invested. So we have now manufacturing construction investment off the charts, double what's been seen before in inflation adjusted manner. And that investment, a lot of it is going to new places. It's in the left, 80% of it is in the sort of left behind places. Let's see. We have, I think, some really cool additional sort of innovations in too many to start, and but one of them I think is the community benefit plan that Kate Gordon really kind of championed at Department of Energy. But actually, Allison Forbes pointed out to me that this comes from kind of local and regional practice. So the knowledge doesn't always flow from the federal government, as Matt has said. There's a lot of bottom up stuff. So we have, I think, just a bunch of cool stuff. Let me talk about sort of future opportunities and continuing challenges. I think Mark talked about the regional divergence that we're seeing that ends a number of decades of regional convergence. I think this is the way forward. These kinds of place-based activities where communities build on their existing assets is really important. I think finance and overcoming the very high hurdle rates that capitalists seem to want to invest, figuring out how to loan to small firms is a continuing challenge. It takes, in current practice, about as much money and effort to validate or to investigate the viability of a $5 million loan or a $500,000 loan as a $50 million loan. Makes it very hard. I think there's also, then there's a lot of kind of climate adjustment and mitigation that needs to go on. I think a problem is thinking about, there's two approaches really to cluster-based development or place-based development that have come together but not completely. One is the innovation cluster idea. And that is that we bring these people together, there's ideas in the air, and all kinds of new great stuff gets created. That group has not cared so much about where the fruits of that innovation go. So sort of, rising tide lifts all boats, end of story. There's another kind of place-based set of policies that is really focused on alleviating poverty. And the idea, sort of the economist idea is, well, if you got poor people, just give them bus tickets to go somewhere else where there's opportunity and jobs. And people who are not economists somehow, for some reason, don't find that story attractive. Those policies are very different. It's things like Tim Bartik has written a lot about this, universal pre-kindergarten, manufacturing extension partnership, small loans. So I think, under the Biden administration and leadership of many people here, I mean, we've seen NIST actually worry about workforce now. So we have innovation and workforce in the same agency. We have the work that Kate led at Department of Energy. We have the work that you guys are doing at state and regional levels. But there's still, I think, more to think about here, and more stakeholders to bring in. And so I have, I guess, two thoughts on that. One is thinking about workers. So these are allies, I think. So workers, both union and non-union, that the voice of the worker is important, both in designing some of these things. I think, we've helpfully moved away. So there's a bunch of progress to celebrate. First, in IMCP, one of the things I think we did was cause economic development directors to meet workforce directors for the first time. Now we get integrated proposals, and clearly people know each other. This is great. We've also moved away from what people have called the train and pray approach of training of community college. But I guess I worry we've moved to this idea of employer-driven workforce development. And I think that leaves some ideas on the table. And then if we could move toward a coalition where we design jobs and technology together, and we have a lot of stakeholders at the table. And so that enables some maybe more high road development where we're actually designing good jobs from the beginning. And so there are challenges, like you think about how do we bring in AI? One way to bring in AI in maintenance is think, we can hire these fancy data scientists. They'll tell us when we need to do preventive maintenance and how to fix a machine. We don't really need to be paying that grizzled old veteran who's cranky, and we don't really like dealing with him, right? But that person probably knows a lot of stuff that the AI, there's been mistakes in the way the AI was programmed, or the AI misses some stuff. Is there a way we can integrate the insights from the AI and the preventive maintenance? There's ways to do it where you get the worst of both worlds. There's some interesting research, but anyway, but is that the kind of thing we could do? So that's the first thing. A second thing is sort of thinking about the supply chain structure of these industries. Can we do things where we bring in the customers of firms? So we're not looking just at small firms in isolation, but we're thinking about their customers. And that solves a bunch of problems for the small company. One is they kind of get one bet if they're going to make an investment. If they buy the wrong robot, or they buy a robot instead of a 3D printer, they've blown it. They can't go back. If a customer advises them, you do this, we'll buy from you, that reduces a lot of the risk. The customer can provide some technical assistance. Customer can help with financing. So I think we have a few examples of this. We can do more. Let's see. Then I guess a last challenge is kind of extending the value chain. We focus, somewhat on production. I think John Zeitzman has wanted us to think about what he's calling production. So can we bring in not just the making of the thing, but the design, the software that may go into programming the equipment? Can we actually, the manufacture of the equipment, can we actually bring all that into these regions? In terms, and then let's see, where am I? Let me stop there and just say, I think we've, achieved a lot of stuff here. We have, I think, the ingredients for this race to the top idea. And then I think we have some challenges, and where we can work forward on, solving some of the finance problems, bringing into our coalition a few more people, integrating these two approaches of, you can sort of think of it as building the pie through innovation and then distributing the pie fairly. Can we integrate those? So I think we have both some challenges, but also some opportunities, and we can build on some resources here to do that. Just to put in context, I think there's more money we could bring in. So Mark mentioned about 80 billion spent by the Biden administration over 4 years. Estimates of how much we spend and other proven to not work strategies like smokestack chasing, tax breaks for individual firms, stadium subsidies, all that is somewhere between 40 and 80 billion dollars per year. So if we could claw back some of those budgets and put it into the stuff that works, we can have more money. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Sue Helper, for your leadership and those comments. And next up, we've got Ben Linville Engler, who formerly was at MIT doing complex system science work. So he's got one leg in that, which is this is knowable, this is doable. We can make the kind of progress we need to make together. But the other leg in the application of that complex system science in manufacturing, he helped with many other stakeholders in the New England area scramble around the manufacturing supply chain during the COVID on that. So anyway, Ben, thanks for being here and giving us your take. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate the time this morning. I'm going to throw a lot at you guys visually, and it's not that I expect people to retain it, but for discussion later. So if you see something, come find me later. Happy to dig in more deeply. What Matt didn't tell you is I actually grew up on a dryland wheat farm in Kansas. Anybody else here from Kansas? Love Kansas. I bristle at the metaphor of the silo as something that's terrible. Because no, but this is kind of important for this conversation. Silos in the dryland wheat farm where I grew up, well, there's no training, so there's no training in praying. You put an 8-year-old on a tractor, but that's a different conversation. But you plant and you pray. And so if you have a crop that comes in, it's important that you keep the yield, or else there's no economic benefit. The silo, I think, as a metaphor is misunderstood because it doesn't just hold the grain of one farmer, it holds the grain of the community of farmers. And so it's not that it's isolated from everybody else, it's isolated from the mice. And I would argue that that actually made the best mousetrap of all, domesticated cats, because they wanted to hang out around the grain silos. So with that, my talk here is called ecosystem engineering. It's a fancy way of saying I am a farmer, I just tend to different fields. I'm going to talk about 2 examples of how we have in Massachusetts and in the region helped to not just call it integrate and connect and coordinate networks, but how we've activated them. I think that's a really important aspect of the work that we're all doing here. And the metaphor of the silo, I think, is important for a different reason. It's a boundary. And system boundaries are very important in system science. We've heard the word place-based or region used probably 30 times already this morning. You got to define what those boundaries are for the region. Is the region within a county? Is it a municipality? Is it multiple states? Is it part of the national regional system? So that's really, really important as we get into some of these activities. So there's more that we could talk about here. I chose 2 examples to go through, but for some context, the MassTech Collaborative is an economic development agency for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We've been doing technology and innovation cluster development for over 30 years in areas like life sciences. We're working in quantum now. I'm going to talk a lot about our Center for Advanced Manufacturing. Lily Fitzgerald, who's the director for our Center for Advanced Manufacturing, is here, so she's here available for questions and discussions later. And I'll talk about our Northeast Microelectronics Coalition Hub, which is a Northeast regional effort that is funded through the CHIPS Act for the Department of Defense. So as Matt said, complexity is a mess, and this is bottom-up innovation during COVID. A lot of great, well-intended ideas of how to respond to COVID for PPE, for vaccines, and a bunch of other things. Our effort looked to really focus on how do we look at medical countermeasures specifically to PPE. So all of these dots represent different organizations or ideas that were bottom-up ideas of how to do this in the first 6 months of COVID. Really challenging when you talk about supply chains and people buying the same materials to get any high-level impact. So the network is complex. Connecting the dots is what can create supply chains. It's what can create value change, which is what Sue was just talking about when you bring in design and other things. So we took very much a systems approach to this, really understanding the needs and the demands from the healthcare system. What are the external factors with regulatory, economic problems, the capacity and capability to respond for manufacturers, And this is important where, from that standpoint, individuals have skills within a company whose motivations may not always be aligned with the organization. So a company is different than a person. What's the product system life cycle of how you're actually making something? And then how do you get to stakeholder cohesion, communication, and navigating these dynamic networks of networks? So our Massachusetts Manufacturing Emergency Response Team played the role of the glue. The benefit we had as a state, because we had been working in advanced manufacturing before COVID hit, is that we had trust between academia, government, industry, and other supply chain partners. People knew each other. So we were caught flat-footed like everybody else, but I like to say we had our shoes on because there was a familiarity of people working together. My background, I spent a decade in med device surgical systems, which is why I was on loan from MIT to the state during this process. Med device product development and the healthcare system is complicated. This is a stakeholder value network that shows you not just the supply chain, the value chain, how stuff is bought and sold. It's a distributed trust network. The patient never knows who made the product. The surgeon or the doctor typically doesn't know that, but everybody has a role to play, as Matt talked about. And it's not just engineers or manufacturers, there's legal, regulatory, et cetera. So in our state, we have an advanced manufacturing collaborative that pulls together leaders of manufacturing. We have strong healthcare innovation ecosystem. So we were working with Chief of Medicine from Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. I was in his lab coat, basically in his pocket for most of COVID, for good and for bad. And at MassTech, as a state economic development agency, had resources and relationships that we could leverage for this. We have a long-standing program in working with alignment with the Manufacturing USA Institutes, where we fund next-generation production technologies, and companies work that line up with those public-private partnership efforts. So we had a lot of these ingredients, but the important part was like activating it towards this mission. And this was something that I think all of you experienced COVID or involved in different response efforts. Aligning on the mission was like a 10-second conversation. Our healthcare workers need X. Everybody's like, great, how do we help? And so we built out a lot of new supply chains, getting to stakeholder engagement and cohesion through multiple meetings. In our ecosystem, in that bottom-up innovation network that we saw, you could have an engineer go talk to a physician and say, oh, this person told me they need this. Or you could have a physician go talk to an engineer and they would say, oh, this person said I could make Y. Most of the time, the engineer, if you ask them what type of physician did you talk to, they don't know. Could have been a dermatologist, could have been a dentist, a podiatrist, wasn't the chief of medicine for a surgical or a hospital. The inverse is true. There's different types of engineers. Did they talk to a software engineer? Do they know how to manufacture anything? So all of these things are really important because it's communication and it's translation across incredible domains of expertise. And I think that's what we run into in a broader scale every day in our manufacturing ecosystems, because it's about the products that we're making for different sectors, for our community, that have importance that relate to a lot of different technologists and areas. We had a process that we looked at for addressing in rapid parallelism, needs and demands, those external factors, capabilities and capacities. The state did bring in funding to help support these efforts. And in total, we helped over 50 manufacturers pivot to produce FDA compliant gear in a very short period of time. And I say FDA compliant gear because I was on the phone 3 times a week with the FDA's Alt Hazards Response Director. We were ensuring that we were doing everything based off of the requirements and testing that they had coming out. And when we took a product lifecycle view of this, it wasn't that we were creating new novel devices. We were making more of what we knew what worked. We were pulling in our academic institutions to help with testing of new manufacturers who were developing those. We started actually doing testing for masks that the state was buying externally before we distributed them to actually see if they worked. And so we were leveraging different touch points in what you would look at as a normal product development manufacturing life cycle. So in total, in about an 8-month period, we helped produce about 15 million items of FDA compliant PPE, over tens of millions of 3D printed swabs that were clinically validated. The counter to this is in that same period of time, FEMA Region 1 distributed 20 million items of PPE to the New England region. So we were at a scale in a short period of time of supporting that. For many of these firms, it helps get them through the economic challenges. But then we were also able to help test a whole host of other products during that time. There's so much more behind this. Happy to talk more or send out more resources. But again, this is sort of the network in action around a very specific area. And in this case, the region being Massachusetts. The next example Matt asked me to talk about, everybody here familiar with the CHIPS and Science Act? Is anybody part of a DoD Microelectronics Commons hub? I got one hand wave. I hope that you all learn about this and want to join following this. There's 8 of them. We're in the Northeast region. We have 235 member organizations. This case, Northeast is New England plus New York and New Jersey. This is somewhat modeled off of the Manufacturing USA Institutes, although we all 8 hubs work on the same technologies, not different technologies. We have about 800 creative individuals that are a part of our hub where we can bring a complex challenge to them in microelectronics technologies and say, how might we solve this as multiple organization teams? We did that about this time last year to compete for $280 million with the other hubs on projects, and we were awarded the most projects, 6 project awards across 5 of the 6 key defense technology areas. And this is an area where I think there's a lot more opportunity and coordination with whether it's the NIST Manufacturing Institutes, whether it's with all of you who are working in manufacturing in your relative states or ecosystems, but coordination with a whole host of other areas in workforce development and other CHIPS programs. So we are building out this effort where it's Massachusetts led. About half of our members are in Massachusetts, but the next 40% are in the Northeast region, and we pull in others from elsewhere in the country. And we're starting to bring in state match. We brought in $40 million from the state of Massachusetts. We brought in $40 million in co-investment from, I'm going to jump through this slide. I'll jump around a little bit. The big part of our mission is and our model is being a regional entry point, which we validated through that project call. Happy to talk more about this and send out more information, but I'm going to be short on time here. One more little map, because I like these squiggly diagrams. This is how Matt knows me. But a lot of this network stuff is mapping. It's just looking at it in different ways. So these are our different members, again, from a geographic standpoint. And then when we did this project call and we look at the 6 different technology areas, we had 43 concept proposals come in. We want to validate this regional model of bringing multiple organizations together. We had 70 of our organizations, 70 of the 90 at the time, participate from across 15 different states. And you'll see a bunch of lines there connect to show you how these different proposals connected on universities, nonprofits, federal labs, and then corporate partners. Should have sped this one up, sorry guys. And all of them together. So this is the activity of the network coming together in these project call areas. We selected 15 to submit, and then ultimately were awarded those 6. So that's the data here showing on those call for projects opportunity. But this is again where, back to this whole metaphor of the silo, our boundary for this is different than our boundary for the emergency response effort. We've had other responses to NSF engines and EDA tech hubs from a place-based standpoint that go down to central Massachusetts or western Massachusetts, different boundaries, different needs, different conditions and strengths in which we need to leverage, or different resources to pull together. So this is for me where, being an engineer, I worked in manufacturing for a decade, was in academia for roughly 3 to 5 years, depending on how you count it. An area where I think having more folks that have an understanding of manufacturing can translate across these different stakeholders really matters, because you can create a lot of action and activity. So happy to talk more about this. Sorry, it was a little bit rambly, but I was wanting to get through a lot here pretty quickly. If you're interested more about our CHIPS Hub, please go to nemicroelectronics.org or find me. Happy to talk more about it. And there's a whole lot more behind this that we built on foundationally from the work that we're doing just within our agency at MassTech and our Center for Advanced Manufacturing. Thanks.
Ben Linville Engler, thank you. You can see why we had Ben here because it's really taking this complex work and applying it in a particular crisis situation, and it really infuses me with a lot of, and should with everyone, a lot of confidence that as complex as this work is, that it is knowable and that we can tackle it if we bring all of our resources together. So Mark, your leadership, Sue, your leadership, Ben, your leadership, thank you for being here. This is an organic meet up and workshop. So engage with them throughout. Please join me in thanking all three.